What if I told you that for the first time in modern history, Europe, not the United States, is now carrying the torch of military leadership in a war that could define the future of global security? Europe surpassing the United States in military aid to Ukraine marks a pivotal moment in transatlantic relations and in the trajectory of the war itself. For much of modern history, it was assumed that Washington would lead in matters of global security, particularly in Europe. The United States was the guarantor of NATO, the indispensable partner in any major conflict, and the primary source of advanced weaponry for allies. Yet, in the case of Ukraine, the numbers are beginning to reveal a different reality. European nations collectively have not only matched American aid, but overtaken it, signaling that the center of gravity in support for Ukraine is shifting across the Atlantic. This change is not merely about statistics. It is about perception, responsibility, and the willingness to act when stakes are high. When Europe surpasses the United States, it challenges the traditional hierarchy of global security leadership and forces observers to question whether a long-term transformation is underway. The symbolic power of Europe's lead is almost as important as the financial and military commitments themselves. It communicates to Moscow that Europe is no longer a passive participant waiting for American direction, but a coalition capable of independent action. For Ukraine, the shift provides reassurance that support will not evaporate should Washington hesitate or waver under political pressures. For the rest of the world, particularly nations watching from Asia and the global south, the European lead signals that responsibility for collective defense is diversifying, making global security less dependent on a single actor. This diversification could reshape alliances, recalibrate expectations, and ultimately create a more multipolar form of defense leadership. The overtaking also reflects Europe's recognition of the existential nature of the threat. Unlike the United States, which views the conflict through a strategic and geopolitical lens from afar, Europe views it from its doorstep. The refugee flows, energy shocks, and proximity to potential escalation mean that for Europeans, Ukraine's fight is intimately tied to their own security. The commitment to exceed American aid is not only about supporting Kyiv, it is about ensuring stability within the continent itself. Thus, Europe's decision to step into the lead is grounded in necessity as much as in principle. Moreover, this development redefines expectations within NATO. For decades, American officials have pressed European allies to spend more on defense and take on greater responsibility. By surpassing US aid to Ukraine, Europe has answered that call in dramatic fashion. What was once framed as reluctance is now being replaced with determination, backed by billions in long-term commitments, expanding defense production and political unity that was previously unthinkable. Europe's ability to step ahead of the United States in military aid is not simply the result of political will, but also of industrial capacity that has been rapidly mobilized to meet Ukraine's needs. In the early phases of the war, European support often relied on surplus stockpiles, older tanks, artillery systems, and ammunition already sitting in warehouses. That model, however, was quickly exhausted as the conflict dragged on and Ukraine's demand for sustained resupply grew. Recognizing this, European governments began to invest heavily in expanding production lines, reopening dormant facilities, and incentivizing defense companies to scale up in ways not seen since the Cold War. The result is a shift from reactive aid to proactive manufacturing, with Europe now producing weapons specifically tailored to Ukraine's battlefield requirements rather than just sending what was available. Factories across Germany, Poland, the Czech Republic, France, and the Nordic countries are running at accelerated rates to deliver artillery shells, drones, and armored vehicles. Ammunition plants have become a focal point of this mobilization, as the war has revealed just how quickly high-intensity conflict consumes resources. European defense ministries are signing multi-year contracts that guarantee long-term demand for producers, ensuring that the surge in capacity will not be temporary but sustained for years to come. This approach contrasts with the more stop-and-go funding cycles seen in Washington, where political debates frequently delay budget approvals and create uncertainty for the defense industry. By contrast, Europe's steady stream of commitments provides both Ukraine and its own industries with a clearer roadmap. Beyond sheer volume, European production is increasingly innovative. Countries like Turkey and the UK are exporting advanced drones, while Germany and France are focusing on modern air defense systems. Smaller nations such as Estonia and Slovakia are also contributing with specialized technologies. demonstrating that Europe's strength lies not only in scale but in the diversity of its defense ecosystem. The collective effect is that Ukraine is receiving a broader mix of weapons systems, some of which are being developed or adapted in near real time based on feedback from the front lines. This industrial mobilization also has a deeper political meaning. It reflects Europe's recognition that security can no longer be outsourced and that the continent must be prepared for a prolonged confrontation. By building capacity that exceeds immediate needs, Europe is not only arming Ukraine, but also laying the groundwork for its own long-term defense resilience. The act of surpassing US contributions is therefore tied to a structural transformation in Europe's ability to project military power independently. Political dynamics in Washington have become one of the defining reasons Europe has stepped into the lead on Ukraine. For much of the war, American aid was seen as the linchpin of Kiev's survival, but as time passed, domestic divisions in the United States began to slow the flow of resources. What was once a bipartisan consensus has increasingly become a source of partisan conflict, with support for Ukraine turning into a fault line in domestic politics. Shifts in leadership, budgetary battles, and the influence of isolationist voices have introduced uncertainty into America's commitment. This unpredictability has not gone unnoticed in Europe. For European leaders, the lesson is clear. They cannot base their security on the fluctuations of another country's political climate, even if that country has historically been their most powerful ally. This political gridlock has concrete consequences. Funding packages that once sailed through Congress have faced delays, cuts, or outright blockages, leaving gaps in Ukraine's supply of weapons and ammunition. Every delay on Capitol Hill sends ripples across Europe, where the immediacy of the threat makes hesitation far more costly. European nations have responded by moving to fill those gaps, announcing new aid packages, launching joint procurement initiatives, and fast-tracking deliveries. In doing so, they have not only compensated for American hesitancy, but also established themselves as dependable partners in Ukraine's defense. At the same time, the political debate in the US has underscored a larger point. For Europe, reliance on Washington is risky when domestic currents in America can shift so sharply. This realization has fueled a sense of urgency among European governments to demonstrate unity and commitment. By coordinating their pledges through EU mechanisms, NATO frameworks, and bilateral agreements, they are making a statement that Europe's resolve will not waver based on the outcome of an election or the rise of a particular political faction abroad. The clarity of this approach stands in contrast to the back and forth of American politics, where one administration's policy can be reversed by the next. For Moscow, these dynamics send mixed signals. American hesitation offers opportunities, but Europe's assertiveness counters them by ensuring Ukraine's support pipeline remains robust. For Kyiv, Europe's consistency provides stability in a time of uncertainty, proving that while US politics may stall, European aid continues to flow. In this way, Washington's internal divisions have inadvertently pushed Europe into a leadership role, one it has embraced both out of necessity and out of recognition that its own security cannot be subject to political stalemate overseas. Europe's decision to coordinate aid through a range of frameworks marks one of the most important aspects of its leadership in Ukraine. Unlike the fragmented and sometimes hesitant approach of the early months of the war, European nations have built mechanisms that allow them to act collectively, efficiently, and with a clear sense of purpose. The European Union has played a central role by establishing funding vehicles such as the European Peace Facility, which reimburses member states for weapons deliveries and encourages further contributions. This system not only spreads the financial burden, but also ensures that smaller countries with limited resources can participate meaningfully in the overall effort. At the same time, NATO has provided a structure for joint training, logistics coordination, and intelligence sharing, giving Ukraine access to a level of support that no single country could provide alone. Bilateral commitments have also proven crucial. Nations such as the United Kingdom, Poland, and the Nordic states have gone beyond collective pledges to announce their own multi-year aid packages. These deals often include not just weapons, but also training programs, defense cooperation agreements, and industrial partnerships that ensure Ukraine can maintain and repair equipment on a long-term basis. When combined with EU-wide and NATO-led initiatives, these bilateral arrangements create a dense web of support that is both flexible and resilient. The result is a system where delays in one channel can be offset by acceleration in another, making the overall supply of aid more dependable than if it rested on a single actor. This coordinated European approach also carries symbolic weight. By acting in unison, Europe demonstrates to Russia that it cannot divide the continent or exploit differences between member states. It signals to the United States that Europe is not waiting passively for direction, but is capable of organizing its own response to threats. For Ukraine, it provides confidence that support will not be contingent on the outcome of a single election or a sudden change of policy in one capital. Instead, it reassures Kyiv that a collective commitment has been made by dozens of governments working together. The impact of this coordination goes beyond Ukraine itself. It lays the foundation for a stronger European defense identity, one that is capable of mounting large-scale responses to crises without relying entirely on external leadership. This development has implications for future conflicts and for Europe's standing within the international system, as it shows that the continent can act decisively when its security is on the line. Strategic autonomy has long been a topic of discussion in Europe, but the war in Ukraine has accelerated it from an abstract idea into a concrete necessity. For decades, European security was underpinned by the assumption that the United States would always take the lead in defending the continent. NATO itself was structured with Washington at its center, and European militaries were built around the premise of American reinforcement in the event of a crisis. The fighting in Ukraine, however, has highlighted the risks of such dependence. As US political debates have cast doubt on long-term commitments, European governments have recognized that they'd be able to shoulder a larger share of responsibility for their own defense. Surpassing the United States in aid to Ukraine is not just about helping Kyiv, it is about proving to themselves and the world that Europe can act as an independent strategic actor. This drive toward autonomy is evident in the kinds of initiatives being pursued. Multi-year funding packages from Germany, France, and the EU demonstrate a willingness to embed support for Ukraine into national and continental budgets, insulating it from short-term political changes. Projects such as the European Sky Shield initiative, which seeks to build a continent-wide air defense system, show that Europe is thinking beyond the current war and preparing for the possibility of future threats. Similarly, the Readiness 2030 plan envisions massive long-term investments in European defense industries, ensuring that Europe does not have to rely on American production for its most critical needs. Each of these steps reflects a broader strategy to reduce reliance on Washington while building capabilities that make Europe a security provider in its own right. Strategic autonomy is not about severing ties with the United States, but about balancing them. European leaders understand that the transatlantic alliance remains essential, particularly in areas like intelligence, nuclear deterrence, and advanced technologies. Yet they also understand that an overdependence on Washington leaves them vulnerable to shifts in US politics. By developing their own industrial base, committing their own resources, and coordinating their own defense strategies, they can ensure that European security does not rise and fall with the outcome of elections across the Atlantic. For Ukraine, this evolution carries profound implications. European aid no longer looks like a temporary bridge until Washington re-engages, has become a long-term pillar of support in its own right. For Russia, it signals that dividing Europe from the United States will not end Ukraine's lifeline, as the continent has shown the capacity to sustain it independently. In stepping into this role, Europe is not only defending its neighbor, but reshaping its place in the global order. Even as Europe takes the lead in military aid, the United States remains an indispensable player in Ukraine's defense. American support may not currently dominate in financial totals, but its qualitative impact is still unmatched in several critical areas. Washington provides Ukraine with some of the most advanced systems available, from long-range precision missiles to sophisticated air defense batteries and counter-drone technologies. These weapons are not easily replicated by European industries, which, despite their growing capacity, still lag behind in certain high-tech sectors. Alongside hardware, US intelligence sharing has proven vital on the battlefield, giving Ukrainian forces access to surveillance data, satellite imagery, and real-time assessments that shape strategic decisions. This element of support operates largely behind the scenes, but significantly amplifies Ukraine's ability to resist Russia's advances. Logistical expertise is another area where American contributions stand apart. The US military has decades of experience coordinating large-scale operations across continents, and it has applied this to the challenge of moving weapons, ammunition, and supplies into Ukraine quickly and efficiently. From transport aircraft to secure supply routes, this logistical backbone has ensured that aid commitments are not just promises on paper, but deliveries that reach the front lines when needed most. European countries are building up similar capabilities, but for now, the infrastructure and know-how provided by the United States remain indispensable. Training has also been a key dimension of American involvement. Thousands of Ukrainian troops have passed through US organized training programs, learning how to operate advanced equipment, adapt to NATO standards, and integrate complex systems into their battlefield strategies. While European allies have expanded their own training missions, the scale and scope of American-led efforts continue to provide an edge that Kyiv cannot do without. This focus on capacity building ensures that Ukraine is not merely receiving weapons, but also gaining the expertise to use them effectively in sustained operations. The result is a layered partnership in which Europe carries the financial and industrial weight, while the United States contributes the advanced capabilities, intelligence, and global logistics that Europe cannot yet match. For Ukraine, this balance is crucial. It guarantees that while European leadership provides continuity and volume, American involvement ensures access to the most sophisticated tools of modern warfare. For the broader alliance, it reflects a new kind of burden, sharing where Europe and the US are not competing but complementing one another in a joint effort to secure Ukraine's survival. The shift in leadership from the United States to Europe in supporting Ukraine is not simply about money or weapons. It represents a redefinition of how power and responsibility are distributed in the 21st century. For decades, global security was organized around a clear hierarchy Washington led, and its allies followed. The war in Ukraine is disrupting that order, showing that Europe is capable of assuming responsibilities once thought beyond its reach. By overtaking the US in aid commitments and industrial output, Europe is proving that it can act decisively in moments of crisis, and in doing so, it is reshaping its image from a junior partner into a genuine co-leader on the world stage. This transformation is not only important for Ukraine, but also for Europe itself. The continent has long wrestled with questions of identity and purpose in international affairs, often caught between dependence on American security guarantees and aspirations for greater independence. The war has forced Europe to choose, and its decision to step forward has brought about a sense of unity that was rarely seen in earlier decades. Multi-year defense pledges, joint procurement strategies, and continent-wide initiatives like air defense programs are evidence that Europe is now building a collective security framework with permanence rather than reacting piecemeal to immediate threats. This deeper commitment suggests that Europe is preparing not just for Ukraine's current battle, but for a long-term role in safeguarding regional and even global stability. For allies outside of Europe, this shift is equally significant. Nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America have long perceived Europe as a secondary player in security matters, often deferring to Washington's lead. The visible change in Europe's posture sends a different message that multiple centers of military and political leadership are emerging, creating a more multipolar system of global defense. This diversification can strengthen collective security by reducing overdependence on a single nation, ensuring that commitments to allies are not derailed by political changes in one capital. Russia, meanwhile, faces a recalibrated strategic environment. While American uncertainty might have encouraged Moscow to believe that Western resolve would fracture, Europe's willingness to assume leadership denies that opportunity. Ukraine benefits not just from the flow of weapons, but from the assurance that its lifeline is backed by a broad coalition that has made its support a matter of long-term policy rather than short-term politics. In this sense, Europe's leadership signals a historic rebalancing of global power, one that will influence alliances and security arrangements far beyond the current conflict. Europe stepping into the lead in military aid to Ukraine is a weight that goes beyond the immediate war. It is part of a broader transformation in how the world understands security and influence in the modern era. For much of the post-World War II period, the United States was the undisputed guarantor of global order, while Europe was often described as a civilian power, strong in diplomacy and economics, but hesitant to project hard military force. By surpassing US contributions, Europe is rewriting that narrative. It is showing that in times of crisis, it is capable not only of economic leadership, but also of sustaining large-scale military commitments. This is not just about supporting a neighboring country under attack. It is about signaling that Europe is willing to take on responsibilities that shape the broader balance of power in the world. This redefinition is especially important because it comes at a time when global alliances are shifting. Countries in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa are closely watching how the West responds to Russia's aggression. The fact that Europe is leading rather than merely following reinforces the credibility of Western commitments and demonstrates that collective security is not dependent on the decisions of a single power. It projects an image of resilience and adaptability, showing that when one partner hesitates, others can step in to maintain momentum. This matters for the trust of allies around the world who might otherwise fear that internal US debates could weaken the West's resolve in other conflicts. For Europe itself, this moment is transformative. The act of surpassing the United States is not only about numbers, but about confidence and political will. It has created a sense of agency that many European nations had lost during years of underinvestment in defense. Now, countries are not only rebuilding their militaries, but also reimagining their role in global security. The experience of coordinating aid to Ukraine, scaling up industrial capacity, and taking collective decisions has strengthened Europe's ability to act as a coherent strategic player. For Ukraine, this shift carries reassurance that its survival is not tied solely to Washington's political cycles. For Russia, it sends a warning that the West's resolve is deeper and more diverse than expected. And for the international community, Europe's new role signals the emergence of a world in which leadership is shared, responsibilities are distributed, and the defense of democracy no longer rests on the shoulders of a single nation. Europe's rise as the primary supporter of Ukraine is more than a response to war. It is a turning point in how power and responsibility are shared across the West. By stepping into leadership, Europe has proven it can act with urgency, unity, and resolve, not just for Ukraine's survival, but for its own security and credibility in the world.